In the busy city of Uvara, everyone knew a young woman called Lina, but almost nobody knew her real story. What they saw was a girl who walked the streets at night wearing short skirts, bright makeup, and shoes so high they made loud sounds on the pavement. The women in the market often pointed at her. "Look at that girl again," one trader would whisper. Another would shake her head and reply, "That one? She sells her body for money, completely useless." Sometimes they laughed loudly so Lina would hear them. One afternoon, a group of young girls returning from school stopped when they saw her sitting beside a small shop smoking quietly. One of them giggled. "Lina, when will you stop this street life?" she mocked. Another added, "Why not become a good girl for once?" The girls burst into laughter. Lina slowly removed the cigarette from her lips and looked at them calmly. "Tell me something," she said quietly. The girls were surprised. She answered, "Have you ever asked why someone lives the life they live?" Lina continued. They rolled their eyes. "Please," one girl said, waving her hand, "don't try to preach to us." Lina only smiled sadly. "You see what you see," she said softly, "but you don't know the story behind it." The girls walked away still laughing. From the doorway of the shop, Mama Jory sighed deeply. "Lina," she said gently, "people talk too much in this town." Lina shrugged. "Let them talk," she replied, staring down the busy street. "Talking is free." But as strong as she tried to look, inside her chest something hurt every time someone called her useless. Because once upon a time, Lina was not the girl people saw today. She was just a small child with a big dream, and everything changed the year she turned 9. Many years before the gossip and the laughter, Lina was just a little girl who lived in a small wooden room at the edge of Uvara. The roof leaked whenever rain fell, and the walls had small cracks that let cold wind enter at night. But to Lina, it was still home because she lived there with the only person who truly loved her, her mother, Rina. Rina was a hard-working woman. Every morning before sunrise, she carried a basket of fruits to the roadside market. She sold bananas, oranges, and roasted groundnuts just to feed her daughter. "Lina, wake up," Rina would say every morning while gently tapping her shoulder. "You must not be late for school." Lina would rub her eyes and smile. "Mama, one day I will become a teacher," she would say proudly. Rina would laugh softly while tying Lina's hair. "A teacher," she would tease. "Then you must study very hard." "I will," Lina would promise. Life was not easy, but there was love in their little room. At night, they ate simple food together, sometimes only gari and groundnuts. One evening, while they were eating, Lina asked a question. "Mama, where is my father?" Rina paused for a moment. Her smile slowly faded. "He lives far away," she finally replied quietly. "Will he come back one day?" Lina asked. Rina forced a small smile and stroked Lina's head. "My daughter," she said softly, "sometimes the people who should stay choose to leave." Lina did not fully understand those words, but she nodded anyway. For years, Rina worked harder than anyone Lina had ever seen. She washed clothes for rich families, cleaned houses, and sometimes even carried heavy loads in the market. But one year, when Lina turned 9, something began to change. Rina started coughing every night. At first, it sounded small, but as the weeks passed, the cough became worse. One night, Lina woke up and saw her mother sitting on the floor, breathing heavily. "Mama," Lina whispered, frightened. "Are you okay?" Rina tried to smile, but the smile was weak. "I'm fine," she said slowly. But deep down, both of them knew something was terribly wrong. And unfortunately, things were about to get much worse. As the days passed, Rina's sickness became worse. The coughing did not stop, and her body grew weaker each morning. Some days, she could barely stand up from the mat where she slept. But even then, she still tried to go to the market. One morning, Lina watched her mother struggle to lift the basket of oranges. "Mama, please don't go today," Lina pleaded. Rina forced a smile, though her face looked pale. "My daughter," she said gently, "if I don't go, what will we eat?" Lena looked down at the floor. She had no answer. That afternoon, Lena returned from school and found her mother lying on the mat, breathing slowly. "Mama," she called softly. Rena opened her eyes. "Come here, Lena," she whispered. Lena quickly knelt beside her. "Are you in pain?" Lena asked. Rena nodded slightly. "I think my body is tired." "Let's go to the hospital," Lena said quickly. Rena gave a weak laugh. "With what money?" she asked. Lena's heart felt heavy. The neighbors knew Rena was sick, but everyone in the area was also struggling with their own problems. Some people gave small help, maybe a plate of food or a few coins, but it was never enough for proper hospital treatment. Weeks passed, and Rena could no longer go to the market. One evening, the coughing became so bad that Lena began to cry. "Mama, please don't die," she said, holding her mother tightly. Rena slowly placed her hand on Lena's cheek. "Listen to me carefully," she whispered. Lena wiped her tears. "You must be strong," Rena continued. "No matter what happens in life, never forget that you are a good person." Lena shook her head desperately. "Nothing will happen to you," she insisted. But Rena's eyes looked distant, as if she could already see something Lena could not see. That night, Lena fell asleep beside her mother, holding her hand. When morning came, sunlight entered the small room through the broken window. Lena stretched her arms and turned toward her mother. "Mama, wake up," she said softly. But Rena did not move. She shook her gently. "Mama." Still nothing. Fear slowly filled Lena's chest. "Mama, please wake up." But her mother was gone, and at only 9 years old, Lena suddenly found herself alone in the world. When Lena realized her mother was not waking up, panic filled the small room. "Mama, please wake up," she whispered, again, shaking her gently. But Rena's body was cold and still. Lena began to cry loudly. Her cries were so painful that neighbors soon gathered outside the small house. Mama Jory, who sold food nearby, rushed inside. "What happened?" she asked quickly. Lena pointed at the mat, tears running down her face. "Mama won't wake up," she sobbed. Mama Jory slowly touched Rena's neck and then covered her mouth in shock. "Oh God," she murmured. Within minutes, more neighbors entered the room. One man shook his head sadly. "She's gone." Lena did not understand everything they were saying, but the fear inside her grew stronger. "Where are you taking my mother?" she cried when 2 men lifted Rena's body. Mama Jory held Lena tightly. "Calm down, child," she said softly. But how could a 9-year-old girl stay calm when the only person she had in the world was suddenly gone? For 3 days, Lena cried until her eyes became swollen. The neighbors contributed small money and arranged a simple burial for Rena. There was no big ceremony, no relatives, no family members to stand beside Lena. After the burial, life slowly returned to normal for everyone else, but not for Lena. One evening, Mama Jory found her sitting alone outside the house. "Where will you go now?" Mama Jory asked gently. Lena wiped her face. "I don't know," she whispered. Mama Jory sighed deeply. "I wish I could take you in," she said sadly, "but I already struggle to feed my own children." Lena nodded quietly. She understood. Days later, the landlord came knocking on the door. "Where is your mother?" he asked harshly. She died," Lena replied softly. The man frowned. "Then who will pay the rent?" Lena had no answer. The landlord shook his head. "You cannot stay here for free," he said firmly. Within a week, Lena lost the small room she once called home. With nowhere to go and no one to guide her, the young girl stepped into the streets of Uvara for the first time. And the streets were not kind to children. The first night Lena slept on the street was the longest night of her life. She sat beside a closed shop near the market, hugging her thin body as the cold wind blew dust across the empty road, and the sounds of dogs barking echoed in the distance. Lena had never been outside alone at night before. "Mama," she whispered softly, but her mother was no longer there to answer.
A group of boys passed by and stared at her. "Hey, small girl, why are you sitting here?" one boy said. Lena lowered her head and said nothing. Another boy laughed. "Maybe she's lost." The boys walked away, still laughing. Later that night, Lena's stomach began to hurt from hunger. She had not eaten anything since morning. Slowly, she stood up and walked toward the market where some food sellers were still packing their goods. She stopped in front of a woman selling roasted corn. "Auntie, please," she said quietly. "Can I have one corn?" The woman looked at her tired face. "Where is your mother?" she asked. "She died," Lena replied softly. The woman's expression softened for a moment. She handed Lena a small piece of corn. "Take this, but don't come here begging every day." "Thank you, Auntie," she said quickly. She ate slowly, trying to make the small food last.
Days turned into weeks, and Lena began to learn the harsh rules of street life. She begged for food during the day. At night, she slept in different corners of the market to avoid trouble. One afternoon, while she was sitting near a stall, a teenage girl walked toward her. The girl looked older, maybe 16, and she wore torn jeans and a faded shirt. "What's your name?" the girl asked. "Lena," she answered quietly. "I'm Vela," the girl said, sitting beside her. "I see you here every day." Lena nodded. "You live on the street now?" Vela asked. "Yes," she replied. Vela sighed. "Then you better learn fast," she said seriously, "because this street, it can destroy people." Lena looked at her nervously. "What do you mean?" she asked. Vela leaned closer and whispered something that made Lena's heart beat faster. "There are ways to survive here, but none of them are easy," she said. Lena looked at Vela with wide, nervous eyes. "What do you mean by that?" she asked quietly. Vela leaned back against the wooden stall and studied Lena carefully. "You're still new on the streets, I can tell." Lena nodded slowly. Vela sighed. "Then listen carefully. If you want to survive here, you must learn quickly." "Learn what?" Lena asked. "How to find food, how to avoid bad men, and sometimes," Vela paused before finishing the sentence, "how to take what the world refuses to give you." Lena did not fully understand. "I don't want to steal," she said quickly. Vela gave a small laugh. "You think the street cares about what you want?" she asked. Lena looked down at the ground. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Vela stood up and pointed across the market. "Come," she said, "let me show you something." They walked between crowded stalls where traders were shouting and customers were bargaining loudly. Vela stopped beside a fruit stand. "Watch carefully," she whispered. A woman selling apples turned her back to attend to another customer. In that quick moment, Vela's hand moved fast. She grabbed 2 apples and slipped them into Lena's hands. "Run," Vela whispered. Lena's heart jumped in fear as they quickly walked away. They stopped behind a building where no one could see them. Vela took 1 apple and gave Lena the other. "See?" she said. "Now we eat." Lena stared at the apple in her hand. "But that is stealing," she said softly. Vela took a bite of her apple. "Maybe," she replied, "but hunger doesn't care about rules." Lena slowly ate the apple, though guilt filled her chest. That evening, as the sun began to set, Vela spoke again. "You can't beg forever," she said. "Why?" Lena asked. "Because begging brings small money," Vela explained, "but there are other ways to get more." Lena frowned. "What ways?" Vela looked at her carefully before answering. "There are men who come to the market at night," she said slowly. Lena immediately shook her head. "I can't do that," she quickly said. "I said the same thing when I first came to the street," Vela replied calmly. Lena stared at her. "You do that?" she asked quietly. Vela did not look ashamed. "I do what I must to stay alive," she said.
Lina felt confused and scared. "I'm still young," she whispered. "The street does not care about age," Vela replied. Just then, a black car slowly stopped near the corner of the road. A middle-aged man stepped out and looked around. Vela nudged Lina gently. "Watch," she whispered. The man spoke to a girl nearby. After a short conversation, the girl entered the car. The vehicle drove away a few minutes later. "See?" Vela said. "What happened?" Lina asked nervously. "That girl will come back with money tonight," Vela explained. Lina remained silent. That night she could not sleep. The cold floor beneath her felt harder than usual, and hunger twisted painfully inside her stomach. By morning she felt weak. Around midday, Vela returned with food and bread. "Eat," she said, handing some to Lina. "Where did you get money?" Lina asked. Vela looked at her calmly. You already
know the answer." Lina lowered her head as she ate. For the first time, the thought crossed her mind. Maybe survival sometimes forces people to become someone they never wanted to be. And slowly, the innocent girl Lina once began to disappear. Days passed and the hunger did not go away. Lina tried to ignore the thoughts that kept returning to her mind, but every time her stomach twisted with hunger, Vela's words echoed again. The street does not care about age. One evening, rain began to fall heavily over the city of Uvara. Traders rushed to close their shops and people ran to their homes to escape the storm. But Lina had no home to run to. She sat under the small roof of a closed shop, hugging her thin body as the cold wind blew rain across the street. Vela arrived a few minutes later, slightly wet but smiling. "You're still here," she said. Lina nodded. "I'm tired," Lina whispered. Vela sat beside her. "I know." For a moment, they both watched the rain silently. Then Lina spoke again. "Vela, how did you start?" Vela looked at her carefully. "Are you sure you want to ask that question?" she said. Lina hesitated, but finally nodded. "I can't keep living like this," she admitted. Vela sighed slowly. "The first time is always the hardest," she said quietly. Lina's heart beat faster. "What happened?" she asked. "I was hungry, like you, very hungry." She paused before continuing. "A man offered me money just to follow him to a small hotel. I was scared, but hunger was stronger than fear." Lina looked down at her hands. "Did it hurt?" she asked softly. Vela did not answer immediately. "It hurt my heart more than anything else," she finally said. The rain continued to fall. A car slowly stopped near the corner of the road. Vela noticed it first. "That man comes here often," she whispered. The car window rolled down, and a man looked toward them. "Girls!" he called out. Lina froze. Vela stood up slowly. "You don't have to do this tonight," she told Lina quietly. "But if you want to survive, you must decide soon." The man waited patiently. Lina's stomach twisted again with hunger. Her mind is filled with memories of her mother, the small house, the life she once had. Tears filled her eyes. Slowly, she stood up. The decision she made that night would change her life forever. And from that moment, Lina's journey into a life she never imagined had truly begun. Lina's legs felt weak as she slowly walked toward the car. Every step felt heavy, like her feet were tied to the ground. The man inside the car looked at her from head to toe. He was probably in his 40s, wearing a neat shirt and a gold wristwatch. "You're new here," he said. Lina did not answer. Her hands trembled slightly. "What is your name?" the man asked. "Lina," she whispered. The man nodded slowly. "I'm Boro," he said calmly. Vela stood a few meters away, watching carefully but saying nothing. Boro opened the passenger door.
"Get in," he said. For a moment, Lena hesitated. Her heart was beating so loudly she felt it in her ears. Then she remembered the hunger, the cold nights, the endless begging. Slowly, she entered the car. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Boro started the engine and drove away from the market streets. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Lena gathered courage. "How much will you pay me?" she asked nervously. The man glanced at her. "I will give you enough to eat for many days." They stopped in front of a small hotel at the edge of the city. Lena's heart sank. Inside the room, Lena stood near the door, unsure of what to do. Boro placed some money on the table. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. But fear had already filled Lena's entire body. That night was the longest night of her young life. When everything was over, Lena quietly picked up the money from the table. Her hands were shaking. Boro looked at her for a moment. "You are different from the other girls," he said. Lena did not respond. She simply walked out of the room. Outside, the early morning sun was just beginning to rise. When she returned to the market area, Vela was waiting for her. "You're back," Vela said softly. Lena handed her some of the money. "I can buy food now," Lena said quietly. But her voice carried a sadness that no amount of money could remove. That morning, Lena brought bread, rice, and water. For the first time in many days, she ate until she was full. But as she sat there eating, a painful thought crossed her mind. The hunger in her stomach had disappeared, but something inside her heart had changed forever. Days turned to weeks, and Lena began to adapt to life on the streets. Hunger had taught her lessons no school ever could. She learned the shortcuts between streets, the quiet corners where she could sleep safely, and the men who paid for companionship. Every night she forced herself to smile, to act confident, to hide the trembling fear that still lived deep inside her. Vela became her closest companion, her guide through this harsh world. "You have to be smart," she said one evening, while they shared stale bread behind a closed shop. Lena nodded, her young face serious beyond her years. She hated what she had to do, hated the life that forced her to survive this way, but she also knew that hunger could not wait for morality. The streets of Uvara were full of whispers and judgment. Market women still pointed when they saw Lena and muttered words she had heard since she was a child: useless, shameless, no future. It stung at first, but Lena gradually stopped reacting. Each insult became just another sound she ignored while she learned to live. She had no time for shame. Survival demanded action. Sometimes she would pass schoolgirls in clean uniforms, smiling faces, textbooks in hand, and a pang of jealousy would hit her. "I used to be like you," she thought quietly. But she knew that life had other plans for her. That girl, the one who dreamed of being a teacher, had been buried under years of loss and hunger. Now, Lena was a survivor, and the world would test her every day. One evening, as Lena sat on a curb eating a piece of bread, a man in a clean suit stopped his car near her. He looked different from the others, calm, not hurried, not rough. He smiled kindly, and Lena instinctively straightened her posture, unsure what to expect. Her heart, hardened by months of suffering, did something it hadn't done in a long time. It fluttered with curiosity instead of fear. That man, Emma, would soon change everything. But Lena did not know it yet. All she saw was a stranger offering her a small act of kindness, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world had more than cruelty in store. And in that moment, the first seeds of change began to take root in Lena's heart. Emma watched Lena carefully, noting how cautious she was. He had seen many children on the streets of Uvara, but something about her struck him differently. There was a quiet sadness in her eyes, a mix of fear and strength. "Hello," he said gently, leaning on the car. "Are you hungry?" Lena froze. No one had asked her that kindly in months. She nodded slowly. Emo smiled. I have some food in my car. Come, let's sit. Lena hesitated. Every instinct told her not to trust strangers, but hunger gnawed at her stomach and a tiny spark of hope flickered inside. She cautiously walked toward the car. Inside, the seats were soft and warm. Emo handed her a small packet of bread and a bottle of water. Lena ate slowly, her hands shaking. You don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to, Emo said kindly. I just want to make sure you're safe. Lena's eyes filled with tears. No one had cared about her safety in a long time. She quietly nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. My name is Lena, she whispered. I'm Emo, he said. Do you live around here? No, I live nowhere, Lena replied softly. Emo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small stack of bills. Take this, he said. Not for anything else, just to get food and a safe place to sleep tonight. Lena stared at the money, her stomach twisted, not from hunger this time, but from disbelief. She had grown used to taking money in ways that cost her dignity. This was different. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly, her voice barely audible. Emo smiled gently. Because sometimes everyone deserves a chance. No one should have to survive like this alone. For the first time in months, Lena felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe the world wasn't entirely cruel. Maybe, just maybe, someone could see her worth beyond the streets, beyond survival, beyond everything she had been forced to become. And in that moment, the first seeds of change began to take root in Lena's heart. Over the next few days, Emo checked on Lena
Regularly. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes he gave her small amounts of money, not as charity, but as a way to help her survive without compromising herself. Lena began to trust him slowly, though a quiet fear always lingered in the back of her mind. One afternoon, Emo handed Lena a small notebook and a pencil. Here, he said, write down everything you want to do, everything you dream of. Don't worry about what's possible right now. Just dream. Lena looked at the notebook, hesitant. She hadn't allowed herself to dream in a long time. Survival had consumed every thought, every hope. But the gentle look in Emo's eyes gave her courage. Slowly, she opened the notebook and began writing. She wrote about finishing school, about having a small room of her own, about learning to sew and cook. She even wrote about someday helping other girls like her who are trapped on the streets. Emo watched quietly. You have a lot of dreams, he said softly, and you deserve every one of them. Lena's heart swelled. She had never heard words like that directed at her before. Most people either judged her, ignored her, or expected her to survive by any means necessary. But Emo treated her like a human being, not a street girl. That night, Lena slept under a small awning near the market. But for the first time, she felt a tiny spark of hope burning in her chest. She held the notebook close to her heart and whispered softly to herself, I will be more than this street. I will be more than my life now. Over the following weeks, Emo began introducing Lena to other ways to survive without compromise. He taught her small skills, how to carry packages for merchants, how to help vendors organize their stalls, even simple bookkeeping. Each small task she completed earned her a little money, but more importantly, each small task reminded her that she could do more than beg, steal, or sell her body. Vela noticed the change too. One evening, she watched Lena organize a small vendor's stall with care and whispered, "You're learning fast." Lena nodded quietly, a new confidence growing in her eyes. The girl who had walked the streets trembling with fear was slowly becoming someone who could stand tall, even in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. Months passed, and Lena's life began to shift slowly but surely. The small tasks Emma gave her turned into a routine. She was no longer the frightened girl hunched over in corners, but a young woman learning to navigate the city with purpose. Each day, she earned a little more money than the day before, enough to rent a small, modest room near the market. It was not much, but it was hers.
One evening, as she cleaned the small room, Lena looked at her reflection in a cracked mirror. She barely recognized herself. Her face was still young, but there was a new determination in her eyes. The girl who had run from hunger, fear, and judgment was now someone who could face the world without shame. Amos stopped by that evening with a warm smile. "I'm proud of you, Lena," he said. "You've come a long way." Lena shook her head. "I'm not there yet," she said quietly. "I still feel like the street follows me wherever I go." Amos nodded knowingly. "The past never completely leaves us," he said, "but you can choose whether it defines you or not." For the first time in Lena's life, Lena understood that survival was no longer just about food or safety. It was about reclaiming herself, piece by piece. She thought about the small notebook she had started months ago and decided to add new goals, learning to read better, improving her handwriting, even starting to save for a business of her own one day. That night, Lena slept soundly in her small room. The noises of the city, the barking dogs, the shouting vendors, the distant cars no longer frightened her. She had survived the worst nights of her life. She had faced hunger, fear, and loneliness, and each challenge had made her stronger. Even Vela noticed the change. "You are different now," she said one afternoon while they walked through the market. "The girl who came here was scared and trembling. She's gone." Lena smiled quietly. She knew Vela was right. The girl was gone, but she also knew that she had to continue growing, continue learning, and continue dreaming. The street had taken a lot from her, but it could not take her spirit if she refused to let it. And for the first time in her young life, Lena truly believed that change was possible, that one day she could rise above the life the street had forced her upon. Lena began noticing other girls on the streets, girls who reminded her painfully of the scared, hungry child she had once been. Some were crying quietly behind stalls, others tried to beg without shame, but their small earnings were barely enough to survive. Lena's heart ached each time she saw them, and slowly a new thought began to grow inside her. Maybe she could help them. One humid afternoon, as Lena walked through the crowded market with a basket of fruits she had helped a vendor organize, she noticed a man observing her from a distance. He wasn't like the usual strangers. He wore clean clothes, carried a small leather briefcase, and his eyes held a gentle curiosity instead of hunger or judgment. The man approached cautiously. "Excuse me," he said politely, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze. "I'm looking for someone to help me with a small project in the city. You seem capable. Would you be interested?" Lena froze. Her first thought was fear. Most men who approached girls like her had intentions that could hurt her. But something about his calm voice and the way he looked at her, not like a street girl, not like an object, made her pause. "What kind of project?" she asked, her voice small but steady. He smiled. "It's a simple work at a small shop, organizing, cleaning, helping with deliveries. You'll be paid fairly, and you can keep your dignity. No one expects anything else." Lena hesitated, remembering the harsh lessons of the streets. Trust no one, fear everyone, survive at all costs. But the memory of Emma's kindness and the small confidence she had been building over the months gave her courage. I can try," she said quietly. "Good," the man replied warmly. "My name is Taro. I'll meet you tomorrow morning at this corner and we'll go together." That night, Lena slept with a mixture of excitement and fear. Could this really be a chance to leave the streets behind? Or was it just another trap, another lesson in disappointment? But deep inside, a spark had ignited. Lena realized that opportunities, even in the darkest places, could appear unexpectedly. And maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to finally step into a life that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with growth, learning, and freedom. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Lena had made a silent promise. She would not let fear dictate her future. She would take this chance, and if it failed, she would rise again. The next morning, Lena woke before sunrise. She dressed carefully, smoothing her hair and adjusting the small dress she had patched together from old clothes. She held her notebook close, the pages filled with dreams and goals that had seemed impossible months ago. Today, they felt within reach. She arrived at the corner where Taro had said he would meet her. True to his word, he was there, waiting patiently. "Good morning, Lena," he said with a gentle smile. "Ready to start?" Lena nodded. Her heart raced, but the fear that had once consumed her was now tempered by cautious hope. "Yes," she said. Taro led her through quieter streets, away from the chaotic market. He showed her a small shop tucked between two larger buildings. The walls were freshly painted, and the air smelled faintly of soap and polished wood. "This is the place," Taro said. "You'll help me with organizing deliveries, inventory, and helping customers. Take your time learning. No one will judge you here." For the first time in her life, Lena felt a strange sensation: dignity. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't a street girl surviving one night at a time. She was someone who could contribute, someone who could be trusted, someone who could earn a living without fear. As she arranged boxes on the shelves, a small customer walked in, a mother with a child. Lena smiled politely, and the mother returned the gesture. It was a simple moment, but to Lena, it felt monumental. She realized that life could offer small victories, quiet confirmations that she was capable of more than survival. When the day ended, Taro handed her a small envelope. "For your efforts today," he said. Lena opened it to find enough money to rent a slightly larger room and buy some necessities. She felt tears prick her eyes. This was not charity. This was a beginning. On her way home, she passed familiar streets where she had once begged, stolen, and feared. She saw other girls watching her curiously. Lena felt a pang of sadness, knowing they were still trapped where she had once been. But she also felt a spark of determination. One day, she would help them, just as Emma had helped her. And that night, Lena wrote in her notebook, carefully noting her progress, her gratitude, and her dreams for the future. She realized that change was not instant, but it was possible, and she had already taken her first steps. Over the following weeks, Lena settled into her work at Taro's shop. Each day brought a new sense of accomplishment. She learned quickly how to track inventory, greet customers politely, and manage small deliveries. The confidence that had been buried under years of fear and shame began to grow. She no longer flinched when people looked at her. Instead, she held her head high, proud of her small victories. One evening, as she counted the day's earnings, Lena realized that she had saved enough to rent a slightly larger room and buy some basic necessities. She hugged her notebook to her chest. "I can do this. I can really do this." Emma called that night as he always did.
As Lena's confidence grew, she began reaching out to other girls on the streets, just as she had in the market months before. She taught them small skills she had learned, like organizing stalls and managing money. Slowly, a small group began to follow her lead, trusting her guidance. For the first time, Lena felt the power of purpose. Her suffering had a meaning now. She could help others avoid the mistakes she had made, or at least give them the tools to survive with dignity. Vela watched in awe. "You've become more than I imagined," she said one afternoon. "You're not just surviving, you're changing lives." Lena nodded quietly. "I want everyone to know that they are not useless, not ever. We just need a chance." Months later, Lena's life had transformed almost beyond recognition. She rented a modest apartment near the market, continued working at Toro's shop, and ran a small evening class for street girls. She taught them sewing, basic math, and reading. She even saved enough to start a tiny savings fund for emergencies. People who once mocked her began to notice the change. Mothers who had sneered now approached her with respect. Some apologized for their harsh words, and Lena forgave them all. She understood that their judgment had come from fear and despair, just as hers had once come from hunger and despair. Through it all, Lena never forgot Emma and Toro, the men who saw her worth when the world did not. Their trust and kindness had opened a door she thought she'd never walk through. And for Lena, that door had led to a life filled with hope, dignity, and purpose. Years later, Lena stood outside her small training center, watching girls learn, laugh, and dream. Some were like her, hungry and alone. Others had only faced small challenges, but all were learning to rise. Lena smiled,
remembering the long nights on the streets, the hunger, the fear, and the shame. She had once been invisible, mocked, and called useless. Now she was a mentor, a businesswoman, and a symbol of hope. Her story spread beyond Uvara. It became a lesson for parents, children, and neighbors. Never judge someone by the life they live, because no life is permanent and everyone has a story. True change is possible when kindness, opportunity, and courage meet. Lena's past was never forgotten, but it no longer defined her. She had turned survival into purpose and pain into compassion. And as she watched the girls around her grow stronger, she knew this was just the beginning. Life had tested her, but she had chosen to rise, and in rising, she had lifted countless others with her. The girl who was once called useless had become powerful in ways no one expected. Thank you for watching, sweet folks. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out of our sweet and captivating stories we have in store for you on this channel. Also, tell us what you've learned and where you're watching from in the comment section. Your voice matters to us here. Stay and enjoy another stories on this channel. We remain the #1 sweetest African folktales. Love you, sweet folks.